Parachutes came into use when they realized that the drum brakes that were in existence at the time would not stop the car before it ran off the end of the racetrack. And they originated with surplus World War II parachutes. Now, sometimes the mismatch between the size of the car and the size of the parachute was rather dramatic. And you've all seen pictures of the early days of the use of parachutes with these huge round parachutes behind this little bitty car. Well, it stopped the car pretty well, but it also would create things. I remember one of the first times, had to be in the late 50s, early 60s, that I saw a jet dragster. The Arfons brothers and a host of others were running jet cars, come down through the finish line traps and pull the parachute. Well, he needed a big parachute because it's an extremely heavy car in terms of the overall mass of the car. And he pulled this parachute, and either the mounting point wasn't exactly right or it was the size of the chute. But when it blossomed, it would pull the front wheels a couple of feet off the ground. And I just stood there in absolute amazement and watched it as it gently settled back to earth and continued on and slowed and turned off the racetrack. That can happen today if you have the mounting point wrong. I know on my old Fiat, at one point I was racing it and had to use the parachute because I still had drum brakes on it, or I'd be off in the rocks at Irwindale or wherever I was running. And I would pull the parachute, but it was mounted in the wrong place on the car because when the parachute blossomed, it pushed the nose of the car tried to bury it into the pavement. So you just pull the parachute and hold on and keep your hands on the wheel tight because you knew it was going to just bang, hit hard. Well, when we did the upgrades to it, we changed the mounting point and all of that. So it helped it immensely. But as I say, the parachutes were a great necessity, and just as much so today. Because while the speeds have increased, the brakes have increased, you still need the parachute to help you safely stop.
Days of the sport, some guys call it the good old days. I'm telling you, used to kill a guy a week driving the cars. You could read drag news, national drag show. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, you'd know this guy died here and that guy died there. And you talk to Don Garlitz and some of the early guys. It's amazing. We didn't die doing this. I mean, the cars were junk. The safety restrictions were non-existent. And it's one of the great things the sport's done now. I mean, you can crash a car at 330 miles an hour today and get up and walk away from it. Unfortunately, you could also bubble wrap the drivers and send them down the track hermetically sealed in an envelope, and things are going to happen. I mean, the Darrell Russell thing in 2004 was tragic. It was a fluke thing. Nobody had ever seen that happen. But the nature of this sport is that things are going to happen that have never happened before. You try to take the experience and learn from it. But from an announcer's point of view, that's the toughest. And then have to sit in front of the crowd and say, well, we're sorry to announce that Scott Coletta passed away, that Mark Niver died. It's terrible. It's the worst thing you can do in the sport. But somebody has to do it, and unfortunately, you're the guy. The West Coast was real big on the fuel cars, very big. The Midwest was really big on what we used to call the gas coupe and sedan cars, the George Montgomerys and guys like that. The East Coast was very big in the early days in junior fuel cars and what we call junior stockers, just the nature of the beast. I mean, the small block, high-winding V8s that used to come in and run, and we used to have big championships with these type cars. And the guys would come from the Midwest and from down south and into the East, and some of the biggest races we had at ATCO were for all those gas class cars. I mean, K.S. Pittman and Big John Masmanian, Ohio George, would all come in to run their cars, Virgil Cates, and then you have the East Coast guys would try to protect their turf from these invaders, that were coming in. But I think geographically, you go across the country, And you could take a look and you could say, well, if you got great cars running out at Indy at the U.S. Nationals, guys winning in the stock and super stock classes, a lot of them were from the East. That was the big thing back there. The fuel cars coming from the West. They used to run, 100 fuel cars out at Lyons or, Orange County, Irwindale, those kind of tracks. We never had that magnitude of fuel cars in, back east. So it was just geographically, you go across the country and see the different type cars pretty much based upon, where you were. I probably, and this may sound a little self-serving, I probably work harder at it than anybody does. I mean, I compile the stats now that ESPN uses for their telecast. I write a story for the Summit Racing website, Drag Race Central, that's called Did You Know? And I like to get all the little tidbits. I take a lot of pride in what I do. I work hard at it and never take anything for granted, It's just been a good gig, been very fortunate. I've been very blessed to meet most of the big name people in the sport and to be able to call a lot of them friends, and it's just a blessing.
Frank Wiley was a very, very adept, significant public relations person, and at that time was working for Dodge Division. And we were talking at one point about the development of the 426 Hemi and what was going on in drag racing and that evolution from super stock to AFX and what was going to be next and what was going on in NASCAR at the time. And he said, John, quite frankly, every time the factories get involved in racing, they screw it up. Racing, he meant. So they fought. And I got to witness that up close and personal because for 10 years, from 1962 to 1972, I was the track announcer at Detroit Dragway, which was the epicenter of that entire factory involvement in drag racing. Yes, it was practiced in other places, but I'm telling you that every Saturday night at Detroit Dragway, somebody was trying something new, okay? And so I got to live that whole transition from bubble top to factory lightweight to super stock to AFX to funny car on kind of a week-to-week adventure basis. And it was a most significant period. And in essence, for those who are still in it, it hasn't slowed a wheat. And in terms of what's happening now, the Ford developed supercharged Super Mustangs of 2010, I think are going to birth a whole new evolution and evolvement of maximum performance race cars that look like motor vehicles racing again on the drag strip, and I think it's long past due.